Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Captain Elena Ramirez sat silently, her back straight, her uniform crisp, her face unreadable. Around her, the room buzzed with voices, young Marines trading quiet jokes, officers flipping through range reports, the scrape of boots and the shuffle of papers filling the stale air. The Reaper's Gauntlet, a trial that had broken men for years, was scheduled to be run today, and all eyes were on the recon platoon. All eyes except on her. She wasn't supposed to be there, at least that's how the looks told it. She was the ghost in the room, tolerated but not respected, present but unseen. The men spoke over her, around her, even when she leaned slightly forward as if to speak. Her words, when they came, were cut off before they ever reached air. She wasn't one of them. She was older, a different path, a pilot once, a sniper once, a survivor of things most of them would never read about. And she knew exactly what they were thinking. She's here because someone pulled strings. She's past her prime. She won't make it through the run. The gauntlet wasn't designed for tourists. It was 5 steel targets scattered across distances no sane rifleman trusted on a shifting wind day. 800 to 1,200 yards, multiple positions, 90 seconds. No clean run had been recorded in 3 years. Every Marine in the room carried the weight of that impossible standard, but today wasn't their turn. Today, against her own quiet intentions, it was hers. She kept her hands folded on the table, the scarred knuckles resting one over the other, the way her father once did when waiting for a verdict. She had been invited by the base commander, at least that's what the papers said. A courtesy, a gesture of respect for service. She hadn't asked. She hadn't wanted to. She only wanted to smell gunpowder again, to feel the steel and walnut of a rifle stock pressed into her shoulder, to remember who she had been before everything fell apart. But a scheduling mix-up had dropped her squarely into the platoon's qualification day, and now 30 sets of young, restless eyes shifted between amusement and irritation at the sight of her. Sergeant Cole Miller, not even 30, his voice sharpened by youth and arrogance, leaned forward with a smirk. "You're joking, right, ma'am? With all due respect, this isn't some showcase for veterans. This is a live-fire qualification. The Reaper's Gauntlet isn't a retirement hobby." His words stung more than she let show. She didn't flinch, didn't even meet his eyes. Instead, Elena adjusted the strap of her rifle case resting by her boots. She could feel the weight of it even before it touched her hands. The same rifle she had carried on deployment, its steel worn smooth from years of field carry, its stock scarred by memory. It wasn't coated in flat dark earth paint or built from carbon fiber and computer science. It was wood and steel, as honest and unyielding as the woman who carried it. Miller's voice cut in again, sharper now. "That thing belongs in a museum, not on my range." She looked up then, not fast, not defensive, just steady. Her eyes were dark, unreadable, carrying the weight of things they would never know. No anger, no defensiveness, no need to prove herself with words, only silence. And that silence, more than any retort, made the young Marines shift uncomfortably in their chairs. "I was invited," she finally said, her voice low but unwavering. The air shifted. Miller gave a short, humorless laugh. "Invited to do what? Watch. Because no one runs the gauntlet clean, not with that museum piece." A ripple of laughter moved through the younger Marines. They were lions in their prime, all swagger, muscle, and precision rifles. Their optics cost more than some men's cars. Their range calculators knew more math than most of them had ever learned in school. And here sat Elena with her faded green canvas mat, her battered rifle case, and her silence. "I'd like to try." The room went still. The words weren't loud, they weren't dramatic, but they fell heavy in the silence, granite in the river of noise. Even Miller stopped smirking. His jaw tightened. "Look, Captain," he said, dropping the thin veil of respect. "This isn't story time. We've got a schedule to keep. The Reaper's Gauntlet isn't for play. It's hard enough for Marines in their prime. You really think you're going to clear it?" There was a sting of challenge in his voice, but underneath it almost hidden a thread of fear. Because if she did, Everything he believed about strength, about youth, about himself would crack. Elena didn't answer him. She bent instead, slow and deliberate, unzipping the case. The sound of the zipper echoed louder than any voice. Inside lay her rifle, the M40, a one she had carried through dust and jungle, a relic to them, but to her it was bone and blood. She ran her fingers along the scar in the stock, a crescent gouge carved decades earlier by shrapnel on a hillside no one in this room had ever seen. Memory pressed in before she could stop it. Rain on leaves, the smell of rot and mud. A voice, her old spotter, Corporal Jensen, whispering, "You don't aim it, you breathe with it. Listen to the wind. Let it tell you where to look." She blinked, the memory dissolved, the sterile room returned. The weight of silence settled back in. Miller's patience snapped. "That's enough. I'm range safety for this qualification and I'm calling it. You're not qualified. Your weapon isn't approved. Pack it up." Elena looked at him then, not through him, not past him, into him, and in her eyes he saw something he hadn't expected, not anger but exhaustion, a kind of weary stillness, a look that carried years of watching arrogance break under fire. "Sergeant," she said quietly, steel beneath the calm, "I was qualifying on rifles like this before you were out of high school. I'm cleared to be here. Now are you going to let me shoot? Or do I have to make a call?" The words hung like smoke. His face flushed red. Around him, the younger Marines shifted uncomfortably. Miller opened his mouth, ready to snap back, ready to drag her off the line, but another voice cut him short. "Let her shoot, Sergeant." It came from the back. Gunnery Sergeant Davis, the range master, stepped forward from the shadows near the tower. His face was carved from deployments, his voice a low grind of gravel and authority. Miller stiffened. "Gunny, she's not." "I'll sign for her," Davis interrupted. His voice carried no room for argument. "The range is cold. Give her one run. Then you can have your range back. Consider it a history lesson." Silence. Miller's jaw worked, but he swallowed whatever was left of his protest. He turned to Elena, eyes hard. "Fine. One run. Clock starts when you're ready." She nodded once. Nothing more, no gloating, no satisfaction, just acceptance. She spread the mat on the concrete, slow, careful, deliberate. She slid the rifle free and set it down, her movements smooth as ritual. Not a rangefinder, not a computer, just a small weathered notebook and a pencil pulled from her pocket. She checked the wind with dust through her fingers, eyes narrowing at the shimmer above the targets. The men watched, their amusement fatting to a different kind of disbelief. "What's she even doing?" someone whispered. "I think math," another muttered. They laughed, but softer now, uneasy. Davis watched her settle in. He'd seen that look before, years ago. That trance-like focus that separated marksmen from shooters. He pulled out his phone, thumbed a number he rarely used, and pressed it to his ear. "Sir," he said when the line answered. "This is Gunnery Sergeant Davis at the long-range range. I think you need to get down here immediately." A pause. "What is it, Gunny?" "There's a civilian on the line, about to run the Reaper's gauntlet." "Then why are you calling me?" Davis's eyes stayed locked on Elena, prone on the mat, her hands caressing the rifle stock like an old friend. His voice dropped, urgent now. "Sir, her name is Captain Elena Ramirez." Silence, heavy, absolute. And then the voice returned, stripped of impatience, sharp with urgency. "Keep that range cold. Don't let her leave. We're on our way." Why did the entire base suddenly go quiet? The low rumble came first, engines heavy and fast tearing across the access road. Marines lifted their heads. Dust plumed in the distance, carried on the California wind. It wasn't normal base traffic. It was a convoy. The young platoon shifted, unsettled. They were trained to recognize tempo. This wasn't routine movement. This was urgency. Sergeant Miller's smirk faltered for the first time. The vehicles broke into view, 3 black SUVs, a Humvee in front. They didn't crawl. They charged. Brakes screeched against gravel, tires throwing grit as doors flew open in perfect military rhythm. Colonel Matthews stepped out first, immaculate in his service uniform, his silver eagles gleaming. From the passenger door, a taller, harder figure emerged, Master Gunnery Sergeant Thorne. His reputation alone silenced a room faster than any shout. Head of the Scout Sniper School, a legend whose gaze could measure distance and wind speed like other men read headlines. The platoon snapped to attention, but no one dared speak. They weren't here for them, they were here for her. Elena lay prone on the mat, eye pressed to scope, her hands steady against the stock. She hadn't moved since Davis gave her clearance. If she noticed the sudden presence of half the command structure, she gave no sign. Matthews and Thorne stopped 10 feet behind her, boots crunching softly in the gravel. Neither saluted. Neither spoke. They just stood, eyes locked on the woman with the rifle. "Ready," Elena murmured, almost to herself. "Time starts now," Miller barked, trying to reclaim authority, his stopwatch clicking sharply. The words barely faded when Elena's finger found the trigger. The rifle roared, not the high, sharp crack of their modern weapons, but a deep, resonant boom. The recoil pressed firm against her shoulder, familiar as breath. Downrange, a pause, then ping. The steel plate at 800 yards rang clear. A murmur rippled through the Marines. Miller's jaw tightened. Without breaking rhythm, Elena's hand worked the bolt, chambering smoothly, shifting her scope to the next target. 950 yards slightly left. Another deep breath. Another squeeze. Ping! The air grew heavier. Their laughter was gone. She remembered a different air, heavy with dust. Iraq, years earlier. Her first confirmed shot, the village below boiling with confusion. She had lain in broken glass, her spotter whispering numbers that blurred in her ears. Fear had nearly drowned her, until she remembered Jensen's voice from another life. "You don't aim, you will it. Listen, trust it." She had breathed with the rifle then, just as she was now. She fired again, 1,000 yards, ping. The Marines stopped whispering altogether. Even Davis, who had seen it before, clenched his jaw tighter. The fourth target loomed 1,100 yards, half hidden behind terrain. The wind gusted now, shifting erratically. Modern ballistic computers struggled with conditions like this, but Elena didn't need one. She studied the shimmer of the mirage, the subtle bend of a thistle near the muzzle, the faint sway of dust over the distant hill. She adjusted her scope a single click, almost silent. "Breathe." Ping. Miller swallowed hard, his fingers stiff around the stopwatch. 4 down, 1 remained. The King, 1,200 yards. A plate so small it looked like a pinprick even through a high-powered optic. Today the wind was cruel. To most, it was impossible. Elena stayed still. Her finger didn't twitch. She waited, breathing in rhythm with the earth. The men fidgeted. The seconds ticked. Sweat traced down Miller's temple. She remembered another wait. Afghanistan, a ridge above a valley. Her spotter had been gone, taken out minutes before. She was alone. The convoy below moved fast, dust spiraling behind them. Intel said a high-value target was inside. She had 90 seconds, one chance, one shot. She had closed her eyes then, felt the wind brush her cheek and listened. Not to numbers, to silence. The memory faded, but the stillness remained. The wind lulled for a breath, imperceptible to the young Marines, not to her. Her finger squeezed. The rifle boomed one last time. Silence stretched, long and unbearable. Then faint but unmistakable ping. 5 shots, 5 targets, a clean run. The stopwatch in Miller's hand trembled. 90 seconds hadn't run out. She had done it. Elena cleared her rifle calmly, sliding the bolt open, setting it gently aside. Only then did she push herself up, her joints stiff but uncomplaining. The Marines stood frozen, disbelief written across their faces. They had never seen it, most never believed it could be done. She turned slowly. and only then acknowledged the colonel and the master gunny. Matthews raised his hand in the sharpest, most profound salute of his career. Thorne followed, rigid, eyes burning with respect. Around them, silence pressed heavy. Matthews's voice carried, low but clear. "Captain Ramirez, it is an honor." He turned to the platoon, his tone hardening to iron. "Marines, you have been complaining that the Reaper's gauntlet is an impossible standard. The woman who just cleaned it with iron sights in her youth and a scope today is the same woman who helped design it over 30 years ago." The words struck like gunfire. Confusion, shock, disbelief etched across young faces. "You are looking at Captain Elena Ramirez," Matthews continued, voice rising with fury. "The one who held the ridge at Coringal Pass with a shattered leg and this rifle. The one who trained half the instructors whose lessons you recite today. The one whose marksmanship records at Quantico have stood unbroken for decades." He stepped closer to Miller, his eyes sharp as blades. "And you called her obsolete." Miller's throat worked, no sound came. Thorne spoke then, his voice gravel and steel. "You're not fit to carry her ammo, Sergeant. Remember that before you dishonor this uniform again." The shame hit harder than any punishment. Miller's face drained white. The other Marines shifted, suddenly aware of their arrogance laid bare. And all eyes turned back to Elena. They expected anger or pride or some quiet gloating. But she only stepped forward, laying a hand gently on the scarred stock of her rifle. Her voice was soft. "The rifle doesn't make the Marine. The Marine makes the rifle. Pride matters, but not in yourself alone, in your brothers, in those who came before you. Otherwise it becomes poison." The words fell heavier than gunfire. Behind her, Davis exhaled, the first sound he had made in minutes. And somewhere in the distance, another convoy rolled across the base, more officers arriving, more witnesses drawn by the echo of legend reawakening. But Elena didn't stay to watch the ripples she had set loose. She only lifted her rifle, the scar in its stock pressed against her palm, and for a fleeting second she was 20 again, lying in mud, listening to the rain whisper lessons no school had ever taught. Then the memory faded, and the silence of the stunned range settled once more. Why did she feel more tired than triumphant? The applause never came. There were no cheers, no celebration, only silence. The Marines stood like statues, their weapons hanging loose at their sides, their eyes wide as though they had seen something impossible. Some looked away. Some stared openly, their expressions caught between awe and shame. Elena felt all of it, the weight of their stares, the heat of their unspoken questions. But none of it mattered. The stock of her rifle pressed against her hand, warm still, the wood scar biting against her thumb. It was enough. Colonel Matthews had already lowered his salute, his jaw clenched. His eyes flicked briefly to Miller, and the young sergeant stiffened like a boy caught breaking glass. No punishment was spoken yet, but it hung heavy in the air, waiting. Thorne leaned slightly toward the colonel, his voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear. "They'll learn more from today than a year of training, if they're wise enough to listen." Elena caught the words. She said nothing. Her silence was its own kind of answer. Davis finally stepped forward, his boots grinding softly against gravel. "Range is cold," he announced, voice steady. It felt ceremonial, as though he were closing a chapter rather than just a session of live fire. Elena bent, lifted her mat, folded it with practiced precision, and slid her rifle back into its case. Each movement was slow, deliberate, not for show, but because her body demanded it. Her knees ached, her back stiffened, her fingers tightened against old pain. Age didn't spare anyone, not even her. And yet she had done it. She hoisted the case, straightened, and finally looked at the Marines again. Most averted their eyes. Only Miller held her gaze, though barely. His face was pale, lips tight, his shame raw and visible. For a second, Elena almost pitied him. Almost. "The rifle doesn't lie," she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. "It listens. You just have to be willing to hear." Then she walked past them, not fast, not slow, just steady. Each step a quiet defiance, each step its own statement. Matthews and Thorne let her pass without a word. Their silence was not dismissal, it was respect. But Miller's silence, that was something else. She didn't drive home right away. Instead, she stopped at the far edge of the base where the land fell into a wide stretch of desert scrub. The horizon shimmered under the afternoon sun, heat haze rising like smoke. She sat on the hood of her old truck, the rifle case beside her, and for the first time in years she let her mind wander back without resistance. Afghanistan. Her spotter's voice again, steady in her headset. Target in the second vehicle. Window cracked, third row, 800 yards. Her heart had hammered in her chest then, louder than the convoy's engines below. She had been younger but still not young, old enough to know fear, old enough to know what a single mistake could mean. "Wind shifting," Jensen whispered. "Left to right, call it 2 clicks." She had breathed, tried to steady, tried to push past the tremor in her hands. She could feel the pressure of the trigger even before she touched it. But then the mortar landed nearby. Dirt and debris exploded, showering them, choking them. Jensen's voice cut sharp. "Focus, Ramirez." Her finger had twitched too soon. The shot cracked. The round went wide. The convoy swerved, shouts over the radio. Chaos. And then the second mortar. She never saw Jensen again. The memory burned, as vivid now as it had been that night when she dragged herself down the ridge, blood caked on her face, guilt weighing heavier than her pack. One shot, one miss, one friend gone. And yet here she was. She rubbed her hands together now, as if trying to shake off the ghosts clinging to her skin. She whispered into the empty desert, "I'm sorry." The wind carried the words away, indifferent. Back on base, consequences had already begun. Matthews wasted no time. Miller and his squad weren't written up officially, no black mark that would shadow them forever. Instead, the colonel ordered something quieter, something heavier. Remedial honor training. 2 months every Saturday, not the range, not the gym, the museum. Polishing plaques, cleaning glass, memorizing the stories of Marines whose names had become legend, reading citations of men and women who bled and died before they were even born. To Miller and his squad it felt like punishment. To Matthews it was salvation. To Thorne it was necessary. And to Elena it was invisible. She didn't hear about it until weeks later. She hadn't asked. She didn't need to. Her work was already done. One evening near dusk, she sat in her kitchen, the windows open to let in the faint desert breeze. The rifle lay disassembled on the table, each part resting in careful order. She cleaned it slowly, methodically, the way she had for years. The scar in the stock caught her eye again. The crescent gouge, shrapnel decades ago. Vietnam, though no one spoke of it much anymore. Back then she wasn't a captain. She wasn't even supposed to be in country. She had found her way in through back doors, unofficial orders, missions no one would ever acknowledge. She remembered the jungle, the damp, the rot, the endless green pressing clothes. She remembered her mentor, Master Sergeant O'Connell, resting a heavy hand on her shoulder as he whispered, "Forget the numbers. This rifle isn't math. It's part of you. Breathe with it. Listen to it. It will never betray you unless you betray yourself." He had been gone within months. Another casualty, another name scribbled in the ledger of forgotten wars. But his voice lingered, echoing still every time her finger brushed that scar. Now in her kitchen she let the memory play. She didn't fight it, she let it hurt. And then she put the rifle back together, piece by piece, until it was whole again. Weeks passed, the whispers didn't stop. If anything, they grew. Her name, once little more than an entry in an old roster, began circulating again. Some spoke with reverence, others with disbelief. Most simply didn't know what to make of her. She didn't seek their opinions. She didn't want their recognition. But the Marines who had mocked her, they carried it differently, especially Miller. One Saturday, he walked into the base exchange, uniform sleeves rolled, his arms heavy with grocery bags. He spotted her instantly. Elena sat at a corner table in the food court, a paper cup of coffee in her hand. Alone, always alone. Miller froze. His instinct was to turn away, to avoid her eyes, to bury himself in distance. But the colonel's words echoed in his head. The stories he had been forced to learn in the museum pressed against his thoughts. The weight of his own shame demanded something else. He drew a slow breath, straightened, and walked toward her. She looked up as he stopped at her table. Her expression was unreadable, neither warm nor cold, just watchful. "Ma'am," Miller said, voice steady though quiet. He shifted the bags to one arm and stood at attention. "I wanted to apologize for my conduct on the range, for the disrespect. I was arrogant, and I was wrong." The words were simple, but heavy. For a long moment, Elena said nothing. She studied him, her eyes searching past the bravado, past the uniform, past the youth that had blinded him. She searched for something real. And she found it. Slowly she nodded. "Apology accepted, Sergeant." She gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Sit. Let me buy you a coffee." Miller blinked, hesitated, then set down his bags and lowered himself into the seat. For the next hour he barely spoke, he only listened. Elena didn't tell war stories. She didn't talk of medals or missions. She spoke of listening, of learning, of remembering. She spoke of the Marine Corps not as a machine of war, but as a chain, each link forged by those who came before, each link holding the next. A chain that arrogance could break if not guarded carefully. By the time Miller left, the weight in his chest felt different. Heavy still, but no longer shame. Something closer to responsibility. Alone again, Elena finished her coffee slowly. The night outside deepened. The world felt quieter. She thought of Jensen, of O'Connell, of the faces that came and went, some lost, some buried, some carried forever in scars invisible to the eye. And she thought of tomorrow. The rifle didn't make the Marine. The Marine made the rifle. But the Marine who made her. Her reflection caught faint in the glass, older now, lined, tired, but unbroken. For the first time in years, she allowed herself a faint smile. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Why did she still hear the rain when she closed her eyes? It had been decades since that jungle. Decades since the suffocating green pressed in from all sides, wet and rotting, alive with the hiss of insects and the faint rustle of unseen things. But sometimes, even now, Elena could hear it as clearly as if she were still lying in the mud, rifle cradled against her chest, heartbeat thundering louder than the monsoon. The scar on the stock, that crescent gouge, it had been born there. They'd called it Operation Sparrow, nothing glamorous, a reconnaissance mission disguised as a sweep. She was 22 then, barely out of Quantico, carrying more doubts than bullets. A woman in a place that didn't want her, wearing a uniform that didn't quite fit. Her unit didn't trust her. Some ignored her. Some mocked her under their breath. The only one who looked her square in the eye was Master Sergeant O'Connell. Old, scarred, carrying himself with a weight that spoke of too many wars. He had been her anchor, her shield, the one who whispered wisdom when no one else spoke to her at all. That night rain hammered the canopy. The air smelled of rot and fear. She lay prone in a shallow foxhole, the jungle pressing so close she could barely see the stars. "Forget the math," O'Connell whispered, leaning close so the others wouldn't hear. His breath smelled of tobacco and mud. "Forget what the manuals told you. This isn't about numbers. This," he tapped her rifle stock, "is you. You breathe, it breathes. You listen, it listens. It won't fail you unless you fail yourself." She had nodded, though fear still gnawed at her chest. The mission was simple on paper. Track a Viet Cong supply line moving through the valley below, confirm presence, radio coordinates, withdraw. But war never stayed simple. The first explosion ripped through the night before they could call anything in. Mortar fire, fast, brutal, men screamed. The jungle lit in bursts of red. Elena pressed into the mud, the smell of cordite filling her lungs. She clutched the rifle tight, waiting for the next blast to finish her. "On me," O'Connell barked, his voice calm even as fire chewed the earth around them. He moved with a grace that seemed impossible for a man his size, hauling two wounded Marines into cover as if he were carrying his own sons. Elena followed, legs trembling, ears ringing. She had never seen men die before, not like this, not so close. They regrouped in a narrow ditch, rain and blood mixing into the same red stream. "Targets," O'Connell growled, pointing toward the tree line. Muzzle flashes bloomed faint against the dark. "They've got spotters. Drop them or we're finished." Her hands shook as she raised the rifle, the reticle blurred. The rain streaked across her scope. She couldn't breathe. "Steady," O'Connell whispered. His voice cut through the chaos, grounding her. "One breath, that's all you need." She exhaled. The world narrowed. One target, just one. She squeezed. The rifle roared. The figure dropped. The men around her shouted something, approval, disbelief, she couldn't tell. All she heard was her own pulse, hammering in her ears. But then the second mortar landed. It came down close, too close. Shrapnel screamed through the air, 1,000 knives spinning. One jagged piece struck her rifle, carving the crescent gouge deep into the stock. Another tore into O'Connell's side. He didn't fall right away. He gritted his teeth, shoved her down with one hand, returned fire with the other. Blood streamed dark through his uniform. "Elena," he hissed, his face pale but fierce. "Listen to me. You're not here by accident. You're not a mistake. You hear me. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She tried to press her hands against his wound. He batted them away. "Don't you dare waste it on me. Eyes on the fight." She obeyed. She didn't know why. Maybe because his voice gave her no choice. Maybe because, for the first time in her life, someone believed she belonged. She fired again, and again. The targets fell. But by the time the jungle fell silent, O'Connell's chest had gone still. Elena blinked. The memory faded. She was back in her kitchen, staring at the rifle stock, thumb tracing the scar as if it were a wound in her own flesh. The voices of the young Marines still echoed faint in her memory, their laughter, their disbelief, their arrogance. It was no different from then. Different uniforms, different rifles, same blindness. She set the rifle down, steadying her breathing. Why had she agreed to this? Why step back onto a firing line after all these years? Because O'Connell's words still lived in her bones. Because Jensen's ghost still walked in her dreams. Because she couldn't stand the thought of another generation forgetting the lessons that had been carved into her with blood and shrapnel. Because silence wasn't enough anymore. On the base, whispers spread faster than reports. By dawn the next morning, every platoon had heard. Some dismissed it as rumor. Some argued she'd been given special treatment. But those who had seen it with their own eyes, the Marines standing on that firing line, carried the truth like a stone in their chest. And Miller most of all. The shame hadn't left him. If anything, it grew heavier with each day at the museum. He stood in front of display cases, polishing glass until his reflection stared back at him. Behind the glass, rifles older than his grandfather, helmets with bullet scars, letters written in shaky script before final battles. At first he read them with boredom, then resentment, then something else. One night after hours, he stood alone in front of a photograph. A young woman in jungle fatigues, her rifle propped against her shoulder, mud streaking her face. The nameplate beneath was tarnished, the caption brief. Captain Elena Ramirez, Operation Sparrow, 1968. Miller's throat tightened. He reached out, fingertips brushing the glass. The words from the range echoed again. "Pride is good, but only if it's in the core, in those who came before you, not just yourself." For the first time, he understood. Elena returned to the range a week later, not for demonstration, not for command, just to sit in the observation tower, her hands resting quietly on the railing. The wind carried faint gunfire from downrange, young Marines running their qualifications, straining for scores that mattered less than they thought. She listened, eyes half closed, hearing not the cracks of rifles but the echoes of voices long gone. O'Connell, Jensen, others she hadn't spoken aloud in years. The past never left, it waited, it lingered, and sometimes it spoke. Later, in the stillness of her small quarters, she wrote in a notebook, a habit she had abandoned long ago. Not reports, not tactics, just memories. She wrote about the rain, about the scar, about the words O'Connell had whispered before the light went out of his eyes. She wrote as if someone might read it one day. Maybe Miller, maybe none of them. But she wrote anyway, because some lessons weren't meant to be buried. At dawn, she carried the rifle outside, the desert chill biting against her skin. She raised it, sighted against the pale horizon, and for a moment she was 22 again. Young, terrified, determined. She fired once into the empty desert. The shot cracked, echoing across the barren hills. No target, no score, just memory. She lowered the rifle, exhaled slowly, and whispered into the silence. "I remember." The wind carried it away. And she knew that was enough. Why was he standing outside her door? Sergeant Miller shifted uncomfortably, his boots grinding faint on the concrete walkway. The early morning air was cool, but sweat slicked his palms. He had rehearsed the words in his head for hours, turning them over, trying to make them sound right. Nothing did, nothing ever would. The corridor of the temporary quarters was silent, only the hum of distant generators breaking the stillness. He stared at the plain door in front of him, her door. Captain Elena Ramirez, the woman who had humiliated him without ever raising her voice. The woman whose rifle scar held more history than his entire career. He raised a hand to knock, stopped, lowered it again. "Coward," he muttered under his breath. And then the door opened. She stood there, hair pulled back, fatigue jacket half-buttoned, eyes narrowing slightly at the sight of him. For a long second, neither spoke. "Sergeant," she said at last, voice flat. "Ma'am," he cleared his throat. "I wanted to ask if," his words faltered. He hated how nervous he sounded. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. But she just waited, her face unreadable. "If you'd show me," he finished finally, his voice almost breaking on the last word. "Show you what?" "The rifle," he said quickly, words tumbling out now. "Not just the shooting, the way you do it, the way you read the wind. I don't get it. None of us do. We all hide behind tech. But you," he caught himself, swallowed hard. "You don't, and I want to learn." Silence stretched between them. She studied him the way she might study a target, measuring not his words but the truth beneath them. At last she stepped aside. "Come in." Her quarters were small, Spartan. A cot, a table, a worn canvas chair. The rifle lay on the table, disassembled, the oil-slick shine of steel glinting faint in the light. A notebook lay open beside it, handwriting sharp and precise across the page. Miller's eyes flicked to it, curious, but she closed it before he could read. "Sit," she said simply. He obeyed, his back stiff, his hands tight against his knees. He felt like a recruit again, waiting to be judged. Elena worked silently, her hands moving across the rifle's parts with a grace that made each motion look inevitable. She didn't speak until the weapon was whole again, resting solid in her hands. "Why?" she asked then, her eyes fixed on him. He blinked. "Why what?" "Why do you want to learn? Because your pride is bruised, or because you've realized pride won't carry you where you need to go?" The words hit like a round to the chest. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. He didn't want to lie, not to her. "Both," he admitted at last. Something in her expression softened, not much, but enough. "Then you might be worth teaching," she said quietly. They went to the range before dawn, when the air was still cool and the wind carried the faintest whispers across the desert. No one else was there. The range stretched long and empty, steel plates dull in the half-light. Miller set his rifle down, the sleek modern M110 bristling with attachments. She carried hers in the old case, as though the years themselves had kept it alive. "First rule," she said, spreading her mat. "This rifle is not math. It's not numbers, it's breath, it's skin, it's you." He frowned slightly. "With respect, ma'am, that sounds like—" "Poetry," she cut in, her tone was sharp. "War is math, survival is poetry, learn the difference." He swallowed, nodded. "Lie down." He obeyed, stretching prone across the mat. She adjusted his elbows, pressed a hand lightly between his shoulder blades until his posture shifted. Every touch was precise, intentional. "Now breathe," she said. He inhaled, exhaled. "No," she snapped. "Not like you're on parade, like you're alive, like you need this breath more than the next one." He tried again, slower this time, deeper. "Better," she murmured. She let the silence hang, only the desert wind filling the space. "Do you hear it?" she asked finally. "Hear what?" "The wind." He frowned. "I feel it." "No, feel is not enough. Listen." He tried, closed his eyes, let the faint whistle brush against his ears. The range stretched before him like an empty canvas. The breeze shifted, rising, falling, carrying the smell of dust. "Good," she said softly. "Now aim, not with your hands, with yourself." He swallowed hard, sighted through his scope, crosshairs settling on the nearest plate. "Breathe with it," she whispered. "When you exhale, let it go. Don't force, don't fight, just release." He squeezed. The rifle cracked. The round hit dirt 3 feet wide of the plate. He cursed under his breath. "Again," she said calmly. He fired again, wide again, closer. On the 4th shot, ping, the steel sang faint across the range. He exhaled sharply, relief flooding him. He turned to her, expecting approval. She only shook her head. "That wasn't the rifle, that was luck. You'll know the difference." Her words cut, but he bit them down. For once he didn't argue. The sun climbed as the hours passed. Sweat soaked his shirt. His shoulders ached. His pride bled out with every miss, every correction. But Elena's voice never rose, never wavered. She guided, sharp when needed, soft when he stumbled. By noon he was hitting consistently at 700 yards. Nothing extraordinary, but different, real. He lay back, exhausted, chest heaving. She sat beside him, unscrewing the canteen, handing it over. "You've got skill," she admitted, "but skill without humility is wasted." He drank deeply, the water warm but welcome. "You really believe that?" Her gaze turned distant. "I've buried men who thought otherwise." The silence stretched heavy. Miller swallowed. "Was that scar on your rifle from one of those times?" Her eyes flicked to him, sharp. For a moment he thought she'd shut him down. Then she nodded once. "Vietnam, shrapnel. My mentor died beside me that night." Miller froze. He hadn't known. He hadn't imagined she had been there. "I carry it because it reminds me," she continued softly. "Not of the pain, but of the responsibility. Every round means something. Every shot is weight. That's what you need to learn." Her voice carried no pride, only truth. And for the first time, Miller understood what he had asked for. Not skill, not secrets, but the burden of what it meant to hold a rifle when lives depended on it. Word spread fast. Marines saw Miller at the range with her, hour after hour, and whispers ran wild. Some mocked, some sneered, but some watched closer. Some began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more to learn than what their computers told them. By the second week, 3 others asked to join. She refused at first, then relented, quietly, without fanfare. Every dawn they met, she spoke little, she demanded much. They failed more often than they succeeded, but slowly they began to change. The arrogance dulled, the silence deepened, and somewhere in that space respect was born. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Miller stayed behind while the others packed up. Elena sat on the bench, cleaning her rifle, the scarred stock glowing faint in the fading light. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "why did you say yes? Why teach me, after the way I treated you?" She paused, the cloth in her hand stilling. She looked up at him, her eyes tired but steady. "Because someone once taught me, when no one else believed I belonged." Her voice cracked just slightly, softer than he'd ever heard it. "And I'll be damned if I let that chain break now." The words hung heavy. Miller nodded, throat tight, no reply possible. He understood, finally. That night, alone in her quarters, Elena opened her notebook again. She wrote, "Pride must bend to humility, or it will break under its own weight. The rifle listens only to those who listen first." She closed it, set it aside, and sat in silence. The ghosts were still there. O'Connell, Jensen, the faces, the rain, they would always be there. But now, at least, she wasn't alone with them anymore. Why was the range suddenly empty? The morning had started as usual. Elena arrived early, her case swinging lightly at her side, Miller and 3 others already waiting. They laid their mats, their faces sharper now, less cocky, though sweat still beaded their brows. They were learning, not fast but steady. But halfway through the session, the siren wailed. Every Marine froze. The sound was different from drills, lower, harsher, carrying urgency that sliced through the desert air. Miller's eyes flicked toward Elena, waiting. She only stood slowly, her gaze scanning the horizon. From the tower, Gunnery Sergeant Davis's voice bellowed through the loudspeaker. "All personnel clear the line. Repeat, clear the line." The young Marines scrambled, uncertain, their rifles clutched awkwardly. Elena stayed calm, sliding her weapon back into its case before stepping forward. "What's happening?" Miller asked, his voice tight. Before she could answer, Davis stormed down the tower steps, his face pale, jaw clenched. "Training suspended. Possible live breach on the perimeter." The words dropped like stones. Miller blinked. "Breach here." Davis didn't slow. Explosives ordnance unit flagged movement along the outer fence. Could be nothing, could be worse. His eyes flicked briefly to Elena. Something unspoken passed there, respect, perhaps, or recognition. Then he was gone, barking orders at others rushing into position. The Marines shifted nervously. Miller looked at Elena again, waiting for guidance he didn't realize he needed. She met his eyes steadily. "First lesson," she said softly, "don't panic. Second lesson, follow the wind." He frowned, confused. "The wind?" Her gaze cut across the desert, toward the shimmer of heat rising from the distant fence line. She saw the way dust lifted, scattering oddly, as if disturbed. She knew the signs. "They're not wrong," she said quietly. "Someone's out there." The base locked down fast. Vehicles rolled, boots pounded, rifles bristled at every checkpoint. Rumors spread in whispers, smugglers, infiltrators, maybe just false alarms. But in the silence of the range, Elena felt the tension coil tighter than a trigger. Matthews arrived within minutes, his SUV grinding to a halt in a spray of dust. He barked orders, officers scattering, reports flying. His eyes found Elena briefly, but he didn't address her. Not yet. Miller and the others stood uncertain, caught between training and duty. Their weapons felt heavy, their orders unclear. Elena moved to them, her voice low, calm. "This isn't the gauntlet. No steel plates, no clock, but it's real, and real means patience." Miller swallowed hard. "What do we do?" "You wait," she said simply, "and you watch. The wind will tell you before the radio does." They stared at her, unsure, but they didn't argue, not anymore. An hour dragged. The sun climbed higher, pressing heat into their backs. Then movement, distant, a shimmer near the outer fence. Elena saw it first, the faint sway of wire, the ripple of sand, the tiny shift that only years of eyes on scopes could catch. She didn't move. She didn't raise her rifle. She only whispered, "There." Miller followed her gaze. At first he saw nothing. Then, yes, a shadow where there shouldn't be one. His throat tightened. His instincts screamed to raise his weapon, but he remembered her words, patience. The others shifted, tense, their breath shallow. Minutes stretched. Then suddenly a figure broke from the brush, sprinting low, a pack slung across their shoulder. Not a soldier, not in uniform. Civilian clothes, dust-stained. Their path cut straight for the fence. Shouts erupted. Radios crackled. Marines shouted, rifles raised. "Stand down," Matthews roared, his voice thunder across the line. "Don't fire until confirmed." The figure dropped, scrambled, crawled forward again. The pack caught on the wire. The shape bulged oddly heavy. Explosives, supplies, no one knew. Miller's hands shook. He looked at Elena. Her eyes never left the figure, calm, calculating. "Not yet," she murmured. "Ma'am," his voice cracked. "Not yet," she repeated. The figure yanked free, stumbled, dropped flat again. The pack spilled open slightly, not wires, not metal, food, cans. Elena's lips pressed tight. Desperation, not sabotage. "Look," she whispered, "not enemy, just hungry." But the young Marines around her hadn't seen what she saw. Their triggers were tight, their fear sharper than their aim. One wrong move, and a desperate man would be a dead one. Elena stepped forward, her rifle lowered, her posture unthreatening. "Hold your fire," she called, voice cutting sharp across the range. The younger Marines flinched. Matthews's head snapped toward her, fury blazing in his eyes. "Captain Ramirez." She ignored him. Her eyes stayed locked on the figure at the fence. He froze, chest heaving, eyes wide with terror. He couldn't be older than 20. Dirt streaked his face, his hands trembling. He clutched the pack like it was life itself. Elena's voice softened, carrying steady across the distance. "Don't move, you're safe, just stay." The man's breath hitched. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. For a long moment no one moved. Rifles stayed raised. Fingers hovered over triggers. Then Matthews barked again, "Stand down." Slowly, reluctantly, rifles lowered. The man collapsed against the dirt, sobbing silently. Marines rushed forward, detaining him gently. The pack taken, inspected, confirmed harmless. The threat dissolved as quickly as it had risen. But the tension lingered. Afterward, Matthews confronted her. His face was stone, his voice edged with command. "You don't give orders here, Captain. You don't step in front of my Marines." Her gaze met his evenly. "If I hadn't, you'd have a body bag where you've got a scared kid." The silence crackled. Officers shifted uncomfortably. Matthews's jaw worked. His fury warred with something else, respect he didn't want to show. Finally, he turned away, his voice clipped. "Get her out of my sight." But Thorne stayed behind. He approached her slowly, his gravel voice low. "You saw what none of them did." Her expression didn't change, "because I listened." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Keep teaching them, quietly, they'll need it." That night Miller found her again. His hand still shook faintly, though he tried to hide it. "You knew," he whispered. "You knew before anyone else. How?" She looked at him, tired but steady. "Because I've seen hungry men before, and scared ones. They move different than soldiers. They breathe different. You'll learn if you stop thinking you already know everything." His face flushed, but not from shame this time, from determination. "Teach me," he said firmly. She gave the faintest of nods. In the quiet of her quarters, she opened her notebook again. She wrote, "Not every shadow is an enemy. Not every shot is meant to be fired. The hardest part of carrying a rifle is knowing when to lower it." She closed the book gently, her hands resting on its worn cover. Outside, the desert wind shifted, whispering across the base. And for the first time in years, Elena felt not just the weight of memory, but the faintest trace of hope. Why did the night feel so still? The desert was rarely silent. Even in darkness, the wind whispered, coyotes yipped in the distance, machinery hummed faint across the base. But tonight, nothing. A strange, breathless quiet settled over the compound, heavy enough to make every Marine glance twice at the shadows. Elena felt it too. Standing on the range tower, her hands resting on the railing, she scanned the horizon. Her eyes narrowed. Something was wrong. Below, Miller and his 3 squad mates moved like restless dogs, fidgeting, their rifles slung loosely. They were better than they had been weeks ago. Sharper, more patient, but patience frayed quickly in silence. He looked up toward her. She didn't call down, she didn't need to. The look she gave was enough. Steady yourself. He nodded, exhaling slowly. The radio crackled then, shattering the silence. A voice clipped and urgent. Possible movement east sector. Unconfirmed. Units on standby. The Marine stiffened. Miller's jaw tightened. He glanced back at Elena again. She remained still, her face unreadable. Minutes dragged, then another report. Infrared picked up heat signatures, 5 or 6, could be animals, could be more. The squad tensed, rifles raising slightly. Elena finally spoke, her voice low, carrying just enough to reach them. Breathe, don't chase ghosts. They obeyed barely. An hour later, confirmation came. Not animals, people. Moving low, careful. A group breaching the fence line with tools, dark figures slipping across the desert like shadows. The order snapped over the radio. Recon squad to intercept. Rules of engagement, hold until identified. Miller's team was nearest. For a heartbeat, panic flickered across his face. Then he steadied, remembering her words. He gave a sharp nod to his men, signaling movement. They spread, low, deliberate, fanning across the scrub with rifles ready. Elena remained in the tower, watching through binoculars, her chest tight. They were her students now, though no one had called them that officially. Their mistakes would be hers. Their restraint would prove if her voice still mattered. Through the glass she saw them advance. Slowly, carefully, no chatter, no wasted movement. For the first time they looked like Marines instead of boys playing soldier. The intruders moved closer unaware, 5 of them, young, tired. Their packs bulged with something Elena couldn't yet see. The order crackled again. Engage if hostile. Miller froze for a breath, weighing it. Elena could almost hear his mind racing. His rifle was steady, his finger close, but he didn't fire, not yet. Listen, Elena whispered under her breath as though he could hear. The rifle will tell you. The wind shifted slightly, carrying sound, and with it voices. Low, whispered, not English but not commands either. Desperation, pleading. Civilians. Elena's stomach twisted. This was no raid, no coordinated strike. These were refugees, smugglers maybe, but not fighters. She could see it in the way they carried themselves, slouched, staggering, not disciplined. Their rifles, the few they had, hung awkward, unused. She grabbed the radio, hold fire. The channel burst with Matthews's voice instantly. Ramirez, you are not cleared to. Look at them, she cut sharply. They're not hostiles, they're starving. Silence. Officers argued faint in the background, voices colliding. On the field, Miller's men glanced at him, waiting. And he waited, he listened, he remembered. Finally, he whispered into his mic, calm but firm. Hold, we wait. The squad froze in place, rifles steady but fingers off triggers. The intruders stumbled further into view. Packs fell. The contents spilled, cans, bottles, blankets, stolen supplies, not weapons. One of the intruders dropped to his knees, hands raised, trembling. The others followed. It was over before it began. Marines swept in, restrained them quickly, no shots fired. The danger dissolved. On the tower, Elena let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Relief washed through her, but so did something else. Pride, quiet, heavy. She climbed down, boots crunching softly on gravel, walking toward the squad as they regrouped. Miller stood apart, his face pale, his rifle hanging loose. He looked at her as she approached, his eyes searching. "You were right," he said quietly. "I almost pulled the trigger, but I heard it, the way they moved, the way they breathed, it wasn't the same." Elena stopped in front of him, her gaze steady. "That's the difference between killing a man and saving him, and you chose right." His throat tightened. He nodded once, the weight of her words sinking deep. Around them the younger Marines watched silently. No one mocked, no one sneered. For the first time there was only respect. But not everyone shared it. Hours later in Matthews's office, the air was heavy with anger. "You undermined my command," he snapped, his voice sharp enough to rattle the blinds. "You don't countermand orders on my channel." Elena stood at attention, unflinching. "I didn't countermand, I told them to see, and they did." Matthews slammed a hand on the desk. "And if you'd been wrong, if those packs had been wired, you'd have 5 dead Marines and their blood would be on your hands." Her jaw tightened. For a moment she saw O'Connell again, blood pouring from his side, whispering words she couldn't forget. "Blood's already on my hands, Colonel," she said quietly. "That's why I won't add more unless I have to." The room froze. Matthews's fury faltered, his lips pressing into a thin line. He studied her for a long moment, then leaned back slowly, his voice lower. "Your methods aren't doctrine, they're dangerous." Her eyes held his. "They're human." Silence stretched. Finally, Matthews waved her out, his expression unreadable. Outside, night had fallen. The desert stretched dark and endless. Elena walked slowly back toward her quarters, the weight of the day pressing against her bones. Miller waited near her door, again, but this time his posture was different. No shame, no arrogance, just steady. "They listened to me today," he said quietly. "Not because I outranked them, but because I waited, because you taught me to." She looked at him for a long moment. Then for the first time she smiled, small, brief, but real. "You listened first," she said. He nodded, his voice dropped, almost reverent. "You saved them and us." She didn't answer. She only opened the door, gestured for him to follow, and sat at the table where her notebook lay open. "Then let's make sure it wasn't luck," she said. "Tomorrow we start again." And as Miller sat across from her, the scarred rifle resting between them, Elena felt something she hadn't in years, not just memory, not just weight. Legacy. That night, long after Miller had gone, she wrote in her notebook, "War teaches us when to shoot. Wisdom teaches us when not to. The hardest lesson is knowing that both matter equally." She closed the book softly, her hand lingering on its cover. For the first time, the ghosts were quiet. Why did it feel like goodbye? The day was clear, the desert sky wide and merciless. On the range, the steel targets shimmered in the heat haze, silent witnesses to generations of Marines who had come and gone. Elena sat at the edge of the mat, her rifle across her knees, her fingers brushing the scar in the stock as though it were a wound in her own flesh. She had been here too many times, firing lines, breaches, silence before chaos. The pattern always repeated, though the faces changed, but today felt different. Today carried a weight she hadn't felt in years. Miller stood a few paces away, his squad behind him. No arrogance now, no sneers, only a quiet readiness, their rifles hanging easy but steady, their breaths even. They had learned more in weeks than they'd admit. And yet, Elena saw it, their eyes still sought hers. The weight of their gaze pressed against her. Teacher, leader, ghost. They wanted something she wasn't sure she had left to give. Before she could decide, the radio on Davis's belt crackled alive. "All units, report to Range Sector 4. Immediate. Possible hostile incursion confirmed." Every Marine stiffened. Elena rose slowly, the rifle in her hand as natural as breath. Davis's jaw clenched, his eyes flicking to her. He didn't order her away. He didn't need to. She was already stepping forward. "Ma'am," Miller said, voice tense, "you don't have to." "I do," she cut in softly. And they moved. The eastern fence line stretched sharp against the desert. Dust plumes rose where vehicles cut across scrub. The air carried a new weight, thick with anticipation. Through her scope, Elena saw them first. 6 figures moving low, disciplined, rifles slung but ready. Not civilians, not refugees, not shadows, trained men. Her stomach nodded. This was no accident. Matthews's voice thundered over the comms. "Engage if fired upon. Do not let them breach the perimeter." Miller's hands flexed against his rifle. His squad crouched low, eyes flicking nervously. Elena lay prone, her body sinking into the mat, her cheek pressing against the stock. The scope brought the world into a narrow circle. Her breath slowed, steadied. O'Connell's voice whispered faint in memory, "Forget the numbers, breathe with it, listen." She did. The intruders moved closer, their formation too tight, too deliberate. This wasn't desperation. It was a probe, a test. "Ma'am," Miller's voice cracked softly over comms. "Do we?" "Wait," she said. Her heart pounded. The ghosts pressed close. Jensen's last shout, O'Connell's dying words, the weight of shots fired and missed, all of it pulled at her chest. But she listened. The wind shifted faintly, carrying not desperation this time, but intent. The intruders moved like predators, not prey. The lead figure raised his rifle. "Now," Elena whispered. The desert cracked alive. Miller fired first, his shot clean, steady. One figure dropped. His squad followed, their rounds sharp, measured, no wasted fire. Elena's own rifle roared, the recoil pressing against her shoulder with familiar certainty. The second figure fell, then the third. The intruders scattered, but they were already too exposed. Within minutes it was over. Silence returned, heavy, final. Elena lowered her rifle slowly, her chest heaving, sweat beading her brow. She rolled onto her back, staring at the endless sky. For the first time in years, the ghosts were silent. Because she had not fired alone. Later, Matthew stood before them, his face hard, his tone clipped, but his words carried weight. "You did what Marines are meant to do. You held the line, you waited. You acted with discipline, that's the standard." His gaze flicked briefly to Elena. For a moment, respect cracked through the iron mask. Then it was gone. The squad dismissed. Miller lingered. He approached her slowly, rifle slung, his face uncharacteristically solemn. "You taught me more in weeks than I learned in years," he said quietly. "Not just shooting, listening, waiting, choosing." Elena studied him. The boy who had mocked her was gone. In his place stood something closer to a Marine, not perfect, not finished, but beginning. "You taught yourself," she said softly. "I just reminded you where to look." His jaw tightened. "I won't forget." She gave the faintest of nods, her hand resting lightly on the scar in the rifle stock. "See that you don't." That night in her quarters, she sat with the notebook open. Her pen scratched slow across the page. Legacy is not medals, not records, not even survival. Legacy is the breath carried forward by those who listened when they didn't want to. The Marine does not belong to the rifle. The rifle belongs to the Marine, and dignity doesn't speak, it acts. She closed the notebook gently, her hand resting over the words. Through the window, the desert wind shifted again, carrying faint laughter from the barracks, the sound of young Marines alive, unbroken, unknowing of how much weight rested behind their training. Elena let the sound fill the silence. For the first time in years, she felt at peace. Not because the ghosts were gone, but because, finally, they had been given voice. And tomorrow, when the sun rose again, she would not need to prove anything. She already had.